Cormac McCarthy believed that science is more important than literature, and today we're going to be hearing from McCarthy and analyzing some of his passages where he goes over this idea because it is so important for us to have this discussion because reading rates are declining, interest in the humanities is declining. And if you look into the future, it's not hard to tell that we are moving into a much more scientifically oriented reality. And if you guys want more Cormac McCarthy content, I have 125 videos just like this one in the playlist at the top of the screen right now. And let's hop into Cormac talking about science.
I think you once told me that for you, science is much more interesting than literature.
Yeah.
Do you think, in that sense, the results of science silenced poetry for 1,000 years? Namely, if we think of the human experience and what I mean, there'll be no legacy because we'll be all gone. But if we think of of humans' contribution to of culture, that science ultimately outshines literature.
Well, you have to go back to Spengler, and you have to, in spite of Spengler being somewhat full of shit, he's an interesting guy, and he is. Somebody said you can't really write him off as a fraud because he's too smart. But Spengler understood that science certainly does, and would probably forever.
Both you and I intimately recognize that there's no separation. And as a scientist, I spent most of my life, and much of what this podcast is about, and trying to show that science is part of our culture and get people as excited. As you say, how could people not be excited? But because people don't realize that what fascinates them really is science. They think it's something else. But yeah. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Shakespeare, don't get me wrong. But it's hard to think that it competes ultimately with the edifice of, say, the standard model of particle physics. What do you think?
Well, I think Spengler's right. We're going to have science after everything else is gone.
Okay, now we're going to look at a passage from Stella Maris, and there's really no big spoilers here. This is a scene when one of the main characters, Alicia, was very young, and she went into her father's office, who was a physicist for the Manhattan Project, and looked at what he was working on. And she had a major revelation similar to McCarthy during this moment. Quite a bit, actually. I tried to puzzle out the paper, but it was hard. I loved the equations. I loved the big sigma signs with the codes for the summations. I loved the narrative that was unfolding. My father came in and found me there and thought I was in trouble, and I jumped up, but he took me by the hand and led me back to the chair and sat me down and went over the paper with me. His explanations were clear, simple, but it was more than that. They were filled with metaphor. He drew a couple Feynman diagrams, and I thought they were pretty cool. They mapped out the world of the subatomic particles he was attempting to explain, the collisions, the weighted routes, and I really understood, that the equations were not a supposition of the form whose life was confined to the symbols on the page which described them, but that they were there before my eyes. In actuality, they were in the paper, the ink, in me. The universe. Their invisibility could never speak against them or their being. Their age, which was the age of reality itself, which was itself invisible and always had been. He had never let go of my hand. So this is a scathing rebuke by McCarthy in Stella Maris, because most of the time we hear the STEM nerds and they're like, oh my God, science is supreme because it's changed the world. And that's what they were kind of hinting at in the video. But science at the level McCarthy is talking about is phenomenology. It is present moment awareness at the highest level and understanding what's happening, because there are particles and quantum mechanics and whatnot existing and working all around me without my consent, and have existed since the formation of reality itself. And McCarthy's kind of hinting at science is reality, because we can project our subjective consciousness onto reality, and we do all the time with religion, with distractions, with so many different things to try to transcend death. As a friend of the channel, Mr. Ernest Becker, says, the denial of death. That's what almost everyone is engaging with out there. And it's so beautiful that Alicia, who is very young, can see this. She can see the mathematics. When you're a child, you have this wonder. It's very easy to exist in that phenomenological reality. And eventually we get pulled out of it as adults and teenagers and whatnot. But she can do that, and she can combine it with a scientific and mathematical understanding, which is like some Aaliyah Atreides Dune stuff. And I think if people approached and talked about science in this manner, it would be much more respected. But instead, the people who go into science most of the time don't have morals because they don't even understand what objective morality is. They don't even understand the debate between moral relativism and objective reality. All they care is about self-preservation, and they saw on the chart that scientists and engineers make $80,000 a year, and that other people make $45 or $50,000 a year. So they are going to do that. I've been to university. I'm sure a lot of you guys have. Some of you guys are probably in STEM fields, and if you're in love with it, that's great. But there is a whole host of people in those fields just it for the money. And when those people gain control, and most of the time people like that are the ambitious types, the bureaucratic types, the administration types, they rise to the top and then they suck all the magic out. And speaking of which, there used to be a kind of interplay too with the humanities and the sciences. When we look at Oppenheimer and Feynman and a lot of the ancient, not the ancient, I should say, even the ancients, you could say, but a lot of the more the classic physicists and scientists, they were very well versed in the humanities because everyone was back then. People had to read the Bible and you went to school, and it was much harder to graduate if you were going to a hard school back then because there were much higher expectations. And they also make a great point. If we want to talk about Dune and other science fiction novels, when people look back at Earth's contribution, I know it's just a subjective Earth author doing that, most of the time they're not thinking about Shakespeare and these people. Those are very overlooked. But the advent of science is what will lead to space travel and us maybe existing forever if we can escape the solar system and all these other things. If literature and music and the humanities got stronger, we would eventually get into science and do all that. Literature can really heal the heart. And that's the whole point of literature. And that's where I want to push back before we kind of get into what he said in the clip, because science in the hands of wrong people is a really bad thing. I don't care what your politics are, but there have been very unjust wars done by all the major powers over the last, we could say 100 years. Everyone has engaged in the killing of innocent civilians through science, through aeronautical engineers making missiles and drones or whatever. And I understand that's also a part of human growth, and we make mistakes. And hindsight's 2020. If we look at like the Vietnam War or the Iraq War or something, like it's easy to say, "Oh, that was a mistake." But literature can give you those guiding principles, can give you that ethical code to be able to transcend the military industrial complex or whatever other forces that are pushing you toward violence and war that could maybe be resolved without violence. So now we're moving into a new age and we're living in Blood Meridian's reality. War is still here. We have nuclear weapons, and if the humanities are declining, the only way that we're going to escape violence is if we're living in some sci-fi world where it's so locked down, it's so surveilled that all the violent types are either locked up or exiled, or we're living in some weird reality where violence has just been eliminated, not through, the general progression of our collective consciousness, but through coercion and force. So that's in my heart one of the big black spots on science right now. And if things go wrong, it's not going to be because of literature, even because religion anymore. We're beyond religion, which was which was a big mover and shaker in wars for a long time. Now we're in the age of science. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but Lawrence Krauss actually makes a very good point that science really isn't divorced from literature. Like, here I am kind of pumping up the science versus literature camps and creating this kind of artificial divide. But if done right, they're supposed to work in unison. That's why engineers, computer scientists, at least at the universities I went to, had to go take a course in ethics in the philosophy department. That could have just been a way to kind of boost the philosophy department to make sure that they don't, eventually die, which is partially probably because of that. But you also want these people to be very well versed and once again have these ethics, because with our massive amount of population and what's going on now with science, we've kind of reached a point in terms of science that if, let's say, an imaginary government wanted to wage an unjust war, there would be but there would be more than enough engineers, scientists, or whoever to do something just for money or for fame or for accolades or for self-preservation or whatever. There are more than enough people if we pick from any part of the world, no race, no country, just as humans right now, once again, as our collective consciousness stands, engineers and scientists, in my opinion, haven't done the due diligence. And I don't think there's probably enough testing. And can you even do that type of monitoring? Because you can learn math and science and engineering on your own. Technically, you need to go to university, but you don't. And there are countries in the world like, North Korea, Iran, and a whole host of others who I would say are pretty bad places who are creating engineers, scientists, whoever, with very skewed morals. And speaking on McCarthy, I mean, this has probably happened since the start of time, though. One of the main reasons for innovation was the innovation of weapons. We had to go into civilizations and into cities, and that whole, trade, and even get into the whole agricultural evolution was a way to prevent ourselves from being killed from animals and other tribes, and obviously to be able to live longer. But the threat of violence, whether from animals or humans, was always present. And so the scientists, the inventors of that time, were most likely also very detached from the political or bureaucratic element of how those weapons were being used, because that's something I kind of glossed over. But if we have an engineer, they're just working in some lab, they're just working on a missile or a weapon or something, or even back in the day. And there's usually a whole other group of people who make all the decisions on how we're going to use that, because a weapon in and of itself is not wrong. It's how it is used and why it is used that, makes it either immoral or immoral. So, we could have a whole discussion on how scientific minds have been exploited by, power hungry and ambitious people who were more of the oratory type. But we'll save that for a different day. What did you guys think? I know Cormac didn't give us very much. I just reread Stella Maris, and I had this kind of video topic already in my head, and I was looking for stuff. But this was kind of the main big statements Cormac made on this issue. So let me know what you guys think. Hop in the debate, and who cares what Cormac says? What do you think? And I will see you guys in the next video on Stella Maris and science very soon. Peace.